Welcome everybody. I am Arlan and I'm with TEDx Amsterdam Education. And today I'm here with Betty Huerta.
Yes.
She has a master's in innovation sciences, is currently a lecturer for the social incubation program at Leiden University, and coaches students to validate market problems. Hi Betty, how are you doing?
I'm very good, Arlen. Thank you for having me in this new experiment you're building with TEDx Education. I love it.
Yeah, cool. Nice that you're here. It's not the first time that you do something with TEDx, right?
No, it's not. I'm both an spectator, but also an organizer. So I'm from Mexico. You didn't mention that, so I'm introducing myself that way. I'm from Mexico, and when I lived in a city called León, and there I worked with I was in the organization team of 3 different TEDx, and I was responsible of the curation of the speakers, which was an amazing experience. It was super nice to have. And I've also loved TEDx, so I've attended different events. Actually, I went to the one that you organized last year, TEDx.
That would be the 2018 event, I think. Yeah, awesome. Wow, what was your experience there? Was it a good one?
I loved it. It was a very good one. I really liked that it was focused on education. So most of the TEDx that I attended, of course, you need to develop a concept. But the fact that you focus on education, it's also, the fact that it's specific, it was a very nice experience. And I also liked that even though we were in the Netherlands, it was in English. So I was able to be there. So it's a very international experience. And I don't know, for the ones that didn't go, the event was also trying to create a more practical or community approach. So the experience itself as having a small kind of circus in the back or some kind of
a festival.
A festival, yeah. So I really like that you also take those breaks into account. Kudos on that.
I'm really glad to hear that. That is exactly what we try to focus on. Basically, the participation of our visitors. So glad that worked. You're saying that you're originally from Mexico and now you're based in the Netherlands. How did that come about? What basically motivated you to do then a master's in the Netherlands?
My education program in Mexico was 5 years long. So once I graduated, I started working, right? So I studied for 5 years and then I started working. I don't know if this is something that happens to a lot of people, but at least for me, after a certain time of working in the field, I was working in the innovation and entrepreneurship field. And my background or my studies were on industrial engineering, which of course it gives a bit of structuring programs and structure and processes, which is important, but I didn't have complete knowledge of what we were talking about. And also I chose my career when I was 18, right? Like you don't know what you like at that age. You make a decision at 18, but you don't really know what's there. So at a certain point, I also got in a moment in my life that I needed to learn something else. I also had to feel that I needed to take a break to think about things. I thought that I've already lived enough that I needed to think about things. Some people go on a 1-year journey if they can afford it. Some other ones take a sabbatical, like in that sense. In my case, I wanted to go back to school, so I wanted to find a master's that suited my let's say dreams or passions. So I just looked for programs. I also wanted to live an international experience, and I wanted to live somewhere that was completely different from Mexico. So in that case, I also decided not to go to Spain, not to go to Italy, not to go, because they are very Latin countries. So I knew that the experience was going to be similar. And the Netherlands was a great spot, but it was not so much about the country, it was much about the content. So I came here to Eindhoven and I did a master's called Innovation Sciences. That's how I came here. I went back to school.
Yeah, great. Indeed, back to school. How did you, because after you did the master's, you decided not to go back. It wasn't sort of like a study abroad trip in that sense. But you ended up being a lecturer, so going into education, and also coaching students at Plan. I think you combined the sort of your old study and the new one, or did you fully go on the second study, the innovation one? Did you really leave the first study area behind, or did you combine it?
I guess I guess you as a person, I guess you don't truly separate yourself from something, right? Like I'm fully myself. So thanks because I did industrial engineering, I can think in processes, I think in optimization, I know how to identify certain things. So I can tell you that, of course, certain aspects of innovation sciences are the ones that I'm more inclined with, but I cannot separate myself from the experience that I've already had. So I'm not focusing completely on industrial engineering, but it also allows me now to have conversations with mentors, or it also allows me to have a different insight on projects. So I think, of course, I never say that what I'm doing is industrial engineering, because I also didn't apply it that much. I was more like a project manager in certain things. But I do think that what I learned and my experience also allows me to have better insights and to perhaps even give some other perspectives. It cannot be the best perspective or the ones that needed, but just the fact that I have this other aspect in my life allows me to do my job right now. So I'll say a mix. Of course, now I'm focused on innovation a bit more.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what you do at Plan.
Yes.
Is it?
Yeah.
Innovation and then entrepreneurship, focusing on that a lot.
Which, I mean, the words, your TEDx education, right? So education, entrepreneurship, innovation, leadership, those are big words that we can have whole discussions of what do they mean. But yeah, the place that I work now, it's called Plant. It's the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship in Leiden. When I was in Mexico, I also worked for Centers for Innovation and Entrepreneurship with different focuses and different different impacts that they wanted to achieve. Ones were more regional, the other ones more focused towards impact and social impact. So the terms, I've also lived them in different places, but at the end, what you want to do, it's just create a better world, even though it sounds romantic, but it is. It's at the end, you can sense that all of them, they want to create a better world. The definition also, it's vague and it's also subjective. So it depends where you are, and depends who are the leaders. But yeah, in a way, that's it. It's entrepreneurship and innovation, which are also, as I said, different concepts.
I think it's funny that you say that, or maybe not funny, but I read on your, there's a good truth to it. I read on your LinkedIn bio, you believe in education, technology, entrepreneurship, and empathy as the four pillars to make systematic changes in the world. But let's stick with entrepreneurship for a bit. Can you tell me maybe what means entrepreneurship to you, and maybe even in regard to education?
I'll divide it in two, because first I would say what other people say, which is also important. So entrepreneurship, it's starting a new business for many people. But at least for me, the entrepreneurial mindset, or how can it be also related to education? It's more a mindset. So entrepreneurship, it's doing projects or starting something new. Again, for some, entrepreneurship, it's starting a new business. So the term of money, it's in there. But for me, or at least how I've worked, it's entrepreneurship. It can also be just starting a new project inside a company. It doesn't have, and there's another one, which is it doesn't have to be an innovative project. It's just starting it. So then that's why some centers need to focus on innovation and entrepreneurship, because what they do is they focus on the intersection between them. So entrepreneurship itself is starting something new. And having an entrepreneurial mindset related to education, it's also learning about what you're doing. So you need to have a time to reflect on the steps that you made. And then you do something, you stop, you go back, you analyze what you did, and you learn from there, and you continue building this new project, whatever that is. Of course, in education, there are different ways to apply it, but that's how is that clear? Yeah?
Yeah, I think so. There is, quite recently I talked to a woman which really stressed the need to take a take a step back, or take a stand still for a second, and basically regenerate your energy, and let everything sink in. She really stressed that, and I also hear that in your answer.
There is a philosopher and an educational expert called John Dewey, and he says learning is not about experience, because sometimes we say learning is experience. But learning doesn't come from experience. Learning comes from reflecting on experience. So reflection and pausing, it's something that we take for granted somehow. And that's why I make explicit that it's important that we understand that we need to pause. And because pausing, sometimes it's the most difficult thing to do, that's also why sometimes we overrule it. And we need to create these spaces to pause and to reflect. And have a balance between pausing, reflecting, and doing. So I think that's entrepreneurial mindset: pausing, reflecting, doing; pausing, reflecting, doing. So yeah. But you were saying, what is education for you in TEDx?
Well, I was saying that entrepreneurship for us in TEDx is almost exactly what you're saying. It has two sides for us. The first one is indeed that you actually start a business, owning a business, maybe even doing taxes, that being part of it, which is obviously great. But if you take away those business parts out of the entrepreneurship, then you are left with principles and attitudes and values, maybe, which can be beneficial either way, which you can definitely apply in areas of life, but also just your study.
Yeah.
Like I think it really affects the way, or how much you get out of your study. How big is that entrepreneurial attitude during your study? Sort of reflects on that, or shows it.
And I would even bring her to a broader audience in sort of way, because of course entrepreneurship mindset, it's important for students right now, but it's also important for teachers. It's also important for employers. Like once you are out there, education formally. I have a friend that says that, well, yeah, education, it's formal and learning happens all the way. So you never stop learning, and we always need to adapt. So now the world is changing so fast. And for example, right now we are recording this, and it's 5th of June. Right the week when the measures in the Netherlands are loosening up, after a moment of big quote unquote pause. Are we gonna learn from it? Are we gonna pause, reflect, and properly incorporate all these things that happened in these past months, or are we gonna run fast and just start doing again? What's gonna be our reaction? And that is entrepreneurship, as we are calling it, right? Like pausing, reflecting, and how do we start again a new project, or how do we start again with this new normality, as some people call it. So it's not only for students.
Yeah, I think that's a great risk, because once indeed the measures broaden, they ease, that's when things go faster, but that's exactly when we should then take a second.
Yeah.
And well, let's maybe not say, maybe it's not true like this, but the entrepreneurs among us might take a step back, might reflect on this period.
Hopefully. I mean,
Hopefully.
that's ideal, right? That's something that I think it's important to continue talking, and to, it's like an idea worth spreading, because the whole entrepreneurial mindset, which I call the validation mindset. I'm not sure if that's like a complete common term in the world, but I call it the validation mindset. It's just validating every time, and to validate, you need to pause and reflect. So I hope that more entrepreneurs are there, or more people out there have this entrepreneurial mindset, which is the validation mindset in itself, which is pausing, reflecting, and then doing again and again. So yeah.
And is that also something that you teach at Plant?
Yeah.
People?
So I'll make a difference also for those that are not related or not that common with the entrepreneurial world or entrepreneurial ecosystem. There is a word called, well, there's organizations or called incubators. So Plan itself is a mix between Center for Entrepreneurship and an incubator. There are many incubators in the world. In the Netherlands, there are also ones are very well known. The the difference, or one of the things that Plant is that it's also related to the university. So we also collaborate with the university in order to provide entrepreneurial education. So there are some incubators that are only focused on entrepreneurship and to support entrepreneurs building a business. But in our case, because we are Center for Entrepreneurship, we also collaborate into developing an entrepreneurial mindset. So we do both. We support entrepreneurs in their journey to building a company, but we also promote entrepreneurial mindset. And that's why I give lectures, and that's why we organize courses, because it's also important to develop this mindset in students as they're going to graduate, and the world is going to be completely different once they graduate. And that's a very, very important skill to have right now and to prepare for the future.
Yeah, exactly. Well, of course, I fully agree here. I was wondering, do you maybe like you're talking about this validating mindset? Maybe it's not super established as a thing. Maybe you can establish that. Maybe later it will say the validating mindset by Betty Huerta. But do you think it has a place in? Well, you already said it has a place in schools, that you do it in universities. But do you think the validating mindset has a place in maybe the high schools, not higher education, I mean high schools, or maybe even other schools, other forms of education?
I definitely think so. I mentioned when I was doing my studies in innovation sciences, I also did an internship doing research on innovation in education. So I can now talk. Again, I'm not an expert on education, I'm more an expert on innovation. So my role was to understand what were schools doing differently. And I went about and I visited a school with the model of Ágora in Roermond, that I know that they are now expanding. And I know that they are the ones that are innovating more, right? But the concept of creating projects, the concept of thinking and reflecting, that's in high school. And that is already something that's applicable. But you can also see that in primary schools. I mean, even when we are learning, so when you're learning how to walk, you are validating yourself. Like you're validating whether the balance is enough. When you're riding a bike, it's also a validation process. You need to, you start, you fail, you learn from what you did, and you continue. And when you're riding a car, you do the same. So to be honest, it's kind of natural or human. But we kind of forget with time that we are a validation a validation machine. Yeah. Yes. So we kind of forget to do that, or we do it more intuitively. But even just cooking, it's a validation, right? So you don't like it. Yes. Yeah. Oh, its salt is missing. So sometimes we do it unconsciously. But it's applied in all elements. So I think that at least we kind of forgot that that's how we learn. And I think that education, the formal education now, is built more on just get as much information as possible. But I think it's the most natural or human thing to do is to learn by validating and learn by experience. So I give an example of perhaps for primary school would be kind of difficult to do that. But that's why you do also field trips. I learn more about geography and history by going to a place, not by reading a book, right? I'm not saying books are not important, but I'm saying that also having this practical experience and being there helps you more understanding a concept. So that's also, in a way, kind of validation. It's doing something, going there. You learn more about how to grow a small plant by growing yourself the little bean or the little plant, than by learning about biology. So I think we kind of see this validation mindset applied to school, but we don't call it that way. But I think that we already know that that's the way we learn.
I honestly feel like maybe we shouldn't call it that way.
Yeah.
Because like you're describing, it's that that process that happens, it's the learning process basically. But once we name it, we say it is reflecting. Now I am going to reflect because I have to. Yeah. Then it kind of loses the value a little bit. And I feel like in the in education now, um, um, we've sort of accepted that we're gonna do the reflection thing,
Yeah.
but we're not down to the core yet, where we just do it automatically as a habit,
I
as
get it.
an unconscious process.
And now that I'm on the other side, like now that I studied masters a year ago, and I'm now also giving classes, right? So I also feel that there's a thin line between also just writing an article. It's reflective enough, but because it's hard to do it, sometimes the students feel like, this is, students or even teachers, because like, this is not important. So we kind of miss the point of why are we doing an article, or why do we need to write our thoughts. Writing our thoughts, man, like writing a thesis, it's the most important thing I've done. Just putting my thoughts out there and going through that process, it's validation process, if we do it with the right intentions, if we know why we're doing it. Because we do not only can reflect by writing an article, that's one, and I think that, or writing a report. So I think that what we lost was how to measure actually reflection. Of course, one way to measure reflection is by seeing or writing a report, but that's not the only way to reflect. And you don't have to reflect only every 6 months or every year with an exam. Also, an exam is not a way also to actually reflect on the learnings or reflect on your experience. So I do think that in a way there's some things incorporated there, because of course, it's 2020, right? So a lot of philosophers and people have, it's not that education is messed up completely, but some schools have gone to the easy way, perhaps, to what is more suited for the masses, or that's what I feel. But it's not entirely or completely wrong. It's not that we did. I feel that sometimes when I heard people, it's like if we have 3,000 years that we need to throw to the trash, and that's not entirely true. There's like we are thinking nowadays, because of a lot of philosophers and education experts put thought on this, right? So now it's how can we adapt or change or modify to the current times. So that's a conversation that we must have. It's how can we adapt to what we're living right now.
Yeah, and I think we also have to realize that it is a massive assignment, so to say.
Yeah.
Because well, if you say these 21st century skills is what we need to focus on, and you could argue that entrepreneurship is one of them.
Yeah.
Because that's a way of persevering, of being creative, thinking out of the box, dealing with failure, all of that. But you don't make that a subject. You don't just learn it. It's very complicated, and we don't have to expect that overnight. Definitely
exactly
not.
And you also need to learn things. You also need to learn about history. You also need to learn about physics. You also need to learn. So what we need to do is just find a nice mix. And if we incorporate now the word innovation, in order to foster innovation, you really need to think deep about deep concepts. Not all of them need to do that, but only innovation comes from bridging biology concepts with mechanical engineering. So that's when, but you cannot do that if you are not learning about those topics, right? And that is only like that's getting information, and you also need that. So it's again finding this bridge that I'm not sure, and I think there are many people in the world creating amazing proposals like Ahora and other places in Finland as well. But yeah, it's just finding this bridge.
Mm-hmm. It's a balance of I guess studying and practical experience in that sense. That's also I think what you did, right? You studied first, and then you came here to do the practical part.
The practical part. And while I was studying, because I had practical part, it was also easier for me to understand certain concepts. So I remember, I worked for 5 years, and my role was to support entrepreneurs, and also we had a budget that we could allocate to different entrepreneurs depending on their needs. So I remember once an entrepreneur, and this is very technical, but it's like a very clear example. I remember once an entrepreneur needed to have an ecosystem map. At that time, I didn't know what that meant. So what I did was I hired a consultant that could help us create this ecosystem map for the entrepreneur. I went back to school, and at one class I was sitting there, and the topic was how to create an ecosystem map. I felt so happy that first I felt frustrated because it was very easy to do, and I paid a lot of money. Well, easy in terms of of course, it's not an easy thing to do, but it was an easy concept. And I paid a lot of money to those consultants in order to develop that. So when I was in the class, I was paying so much attention because I knew the value. I knew how important it could be for an entrepreneur or to develop innovation. And after that, I was just like, I know how much these things is, and I know the value it has outside. So, and I knew the application. And I was looking at my colleagues, and my colleagues that were they passed from bachelor to masters. They were just sitting like, oh, great, that's amazing, ecosystem map.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was also very, very important.
It's the feeling of the happy feeling of truly learning something.
Yeah, like that's what you meant. Amazing. Like when you find a word to that feeling that you didn't know, or when you find the name of the concept of something that you've lived but you didn't know it existed. That I felt that it was a very nice experience.
So he got he used that one. He used the lessons quite nicely for his entrepreneur.
Yeah.
His company, I would say.
Yeah, he did. But I mean, it's a more, but it's how sometimes also as another application. Sometimes we say, yeah, we are studying maths and we do not know why we need to do it, right? Like we are in primary and we're like, why do I need to learn this? And suddenly you see that our world is ruled by maths, and that you couldn't develop an algorithm or you couldn't develop an app if you do not know maths. So we kind of forget the application of certain concepts. And for example, now I am more fascinated about physics and maths than I have ever been, but because now I see the practicality of it and how it's applied in real life, because it is applied in real life. So, but only experience can teach you that.
Yeah. Well, I quite resonate with that. If you can explain what you do exactly at Plant, because you're the venture manager, and in the core you help the students that come there with business validation and market validation.
Yeah, those are big words. Those are very, very big words. So as I mentioned, Plant is more central for entrepreneurship. So we support people that have an idea and that want to develop that idea further. Business validation, and I have to make a difference. So there are several steps that a person should encounter in order to, and this is according to certain theories, but the most important one is the lean startup. So the lean startup, it's a common framework used around the world in order to come from idea to a business. So the first step that you need to validate is a problem validation. Why do you need to validate a problem or a need validation? Because there's no reason to build a business if you're not actually solving a need. Who are you trying to help? What is the problem that's there that you are trying to solve and that you're going to create value in order to solve it? Or what is the need that you're trying to solve? So the first step is just problem validation. And when you do a problem validation, you also need to be very, very open to spot opportunities. So that is a very important stage, and it can last 3 months or a year. It depends on how knowledgeable you are. So what we do, I don't do that specifically, but I have a colleague that's focused on that. And if you want to start a business, whoever is listening, or if you want to start a project, not necessarily a business, this is a very important aspect. You need to understand the context. So problem validation is first. Once you have a hinge and you have spoken to enough people, when I say validation, you don't sit in your research in your desktop and research. You talk to people, you get out there, you interview, you look at people, you are there. Sometimes you don't need to do that because you've already experienced enough to know that there is a problem. So you've already validated that, like by being there, you understood that. Once you do that, you have a hinge, like, it'll be great if this existed. So you come up with your first idea. And your first idea might be a shop, an app, something, right? Like you come up with the first idea on how to solve that. And usually that first idea
is it?
It's never, no, it's just like, it's never the thing that you have to do. And then you go to the solution validation. And the solution would be, okay, is there people willing to pay for this idea that I have? Are people willing to pay for this? And pay, of course, when we are talking about business, we talk about money, right? But sometimes it's not necessarily only money that people are willing to pay. So now I also have to talk about that, because people pay with their data, people pay with their time, people pay with different elements. So then you go into, are they willing to pay, in which form, how often, are stakeholders willing to collaborate with me? Do I have the right partners? So once you have your idea, you go into the idea validation, and that requires market validation, customer validation. So you need to validate certain elements, financial validation, team validation. For me, it's the most important. And that's the first step. Are you really willing to be an entrepreneur? Are you really serious about this? So that's a little bit of the first steps you need to take. And lastly comes the business validation. That's usually takes 1 to 3 years. And that is the startup phase. That is what an incubator actually helps you with. It's like, okay, so now how do you set up a business itself? So they're like very, very small steps that are crucial, like as foundations. And the business are like the walls and the windows. But in order to get there, you really need to get your foundations in order, which is there really a problem and a need? Is the team ready for it? Are people willing to pay? Okay, so now let's go and see, how are they willing to pay? Is this a solution? Are there other things that we can offer? Is the way that I thought the solution should be this way, or should we go that way? So you probably start thinking about building a house with squares, like with just a square house, but you end up building a circle or like a sphere that's completely different to what you imagined. But if you're listening to the customer, to the market, if you validate with them and you validate with the context and with your team, then you build something that's appealable to customers, and you create value and you solve a problem. Ideally, that's the process and the flow that you should go.
Yeah, very clear. Only thing I'm thinking right now is, if I was to start a company right now, and I'd have an idea that I think is really good, 3 years. If I hear then 3 years to basically start working on the product.
Wait. No. It's 3 years to completely validate the business model. So it needs to be very fast. You can validate the problem easily, and you can start working on it easily, but usually it takes like 3 years. But you're up and running, huh? Like it's 3 years when you are settled.
Yeah, okay.
When you're like, this is it. Like I get it. My name is there. People know me. This is the right business model. But usually it takes 3 years. Of course, it'll be like 6 months to start. But then from those 6 months up until 3 years is when you're still tweaking, when you're still looking, when you perhaps need funding, when you're going around. So that's
now
you can start. You can start tomorrow if you want. You don't need 3 years. But after 3 years, you'll be like, okay, I got it.
Now I get it. You basically use the principle of the validation throughout building your whole company, and that process is never done, so to say.
Exactly.
And after you actually launched for real, then you probably still are gonna do validating on your improvements.
Exactly, and that's still happening for big companies, huh? Like say Instagram. If you wanna launch a new feature, so Instagram a couple of months ago, we're trying to see whether or not to leave the likes, like if you could see likes or not in your feed. That's a validation. They run experiments. They went through the validation process, and I think they're running still experiments in certain countries, or even Facebook. They are still running whether the algorithm goes this way or not. Amazon, testing, experimenting.
I noticed that YouTube moved their comment section on mobile app, and the day that happened, well, of course, I had trouble finding it because it's so built into muscle memory. But also the comments were fierce. They were they were harsh. So it was validated that that wasn't really a good idea. But I think they've done that now. They've done that back and forth for a couple times now. And of course, they're getting some negative reactions. But it seems like they validated that they're sticking with it, which is interesting to me.
Okay.
But of course, we cannot see behind the scenes.
And that is exactly that is a validation. You see, you never end. You never end. And for companies, for teachers, it's also like for teachers now. It's clear that they need to adapt. Now we also need to adapt to the new regulations. So we need to validate whether we use this app, this thing. Do we make breakout rooms? Do we send information beforehand? Do we communicate with with the parents through WhatsApp or not? We constantly need to run small experiments. But I think now that you mentioned that, it's also important to acknowledge that we make decisions. We try always to make a good decision, right? It's not like we wake up and you decide in the morning, let me just make the worst decision ever. No, we never do that. We try our best to make the best decision. Unfortunately, we don't always have all the right information to do that. So I think it's very important to be humble and to recognize and to be. That's why I also say empathy is important, and empathy towards ourselves. I think it's important to recognize, hey, at that time, I didn't have the information nor the experience to know what was the best thing to do. And that is okay. I acknowledge that. I forgive myself for that. Guys, I didn't have the information, but now I think this is the way to go. I may be wrong, But now I think
I may be wrong again.
I may be wrong again, and that is okay. So then you go, you evaluate, you pause, you reflect, and you're like, I was true. Let's continue this way. Or no, I was wrong. Let's move around. But that fact, the pausing part requires humbleness and requires to acknowledge that you were wrong. But you were not wrong because you were a bad person. You were wrong because you didn't have the full information. You went with your gut, perhaps, or you went with whatever your mind said. But now that, like, summing it up, I think that's very, very important to have, because that's the only way where we can truly, truly learn of experience.
I think that sums it up quite well indeed. Let's go to the ending of this podcast.
Perfect.
Betty, can I thank you so much for having this TEDx conversation with me?
I loved it, yes.
It's super interesting to deepen out this entrepreneurship focus that we have. And it's been my pleasure.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me, and good luck with this experiment, because you're also validating whether or not this is a experiment to run. I love this. I love being part of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.